What purpose does a close-up serve? Some might say it serves to isolate a subject from the rest of the mise-en-scène in order to indicate its importance in some form. Some might even say that a close-up of an inanimate object serves to endow that object with life, or give it a character in regards to the narrative. However, strictly discussing the human face and close-ups of the face, the purpose becomes somewhat more cloudy. A close-up may not necessarily be indicative of plot relevance, as human characters on screen are typically thought to have relevance regardless of the placement of the shot. Rather than cue the viewer into an important plot device, with the human face, the purpose of a close-up is to give the viewer a chance to peer inside that person's psyche, to see how they operate, and to understand concepts that go far beyond surface-level observations. To begin, a close-up inherently cues the viewer to read further into the subject of the shot than he might have otherwise. As Mary Ann Doane writes, the close-up, more than any other types of shots, demonstrates the deictic nature of the cinematic image, its inevitable indexicality. Indeed, the presence of a close-up seems to beckon the viewer, call them to closely examine what they're watching and analyze what appears on screen beyond surface-level observation. Thus, a close-up of the face by very nature invites a much deeper understanding of the character on screen, and essentially cues the viewer to begin this analysis for himself. What kinds of benefits does this analysis bring? Whether or not the viewer realizes it, from the very moment a face is presented to him, he is constantly analyzing it, noticing the microscopic movements and the subtle changes in expression. This is instinctual, and it is what allows us to read the emotions of others. In the same way that we can sense another person's anger or happiness, a film's viewer is able to understand complex emotions of characters on screen by this scanning and analysis of faces. To quote Elsesser and Hegner, the cinema might play an important part in human cognitive evolution when it comes to the origins of empathy, sympathy, and effective interaction with others. The ability of the viewer to recognize emotions and subtleties in an actor's face leads to a sense of either sympathy or empathy for that character. Whether conscious or subconscious, the viewer is allowed identification with the character by means of simply observing their facial composition via close-up shot. But what kind of expression best achieves this sense of identification between viewer and actor? Is it best for an actor to be explicit with his facial expressions so as to make it easier for the viewer to understand? Or perhaps is it best to remain subtle and let the viewer fill in the blanks for himself? Stephen Woodward writes that the lyrical element can come from the way the filmmaker frames a performer's face in close-up, since the face still instinctively, unconsciously speaks the lost universal language. The most important part of this statement is the use of the words instinctively and unconsciously. The implication is that the human face is capable of thousands upon thousands of different micro-expressions without the need for explicit or excessive acting. For instance, looking at a film like Cecil B. DeMille's The Cheat, one of the most striking scenes is this one, where the viewer is shown Sessue Hayakawa's face isolated in the frame. There's no emotion being explicitly expressed, yet given the context of the film and the isolation of the actor's face, the viewer is able to put the pieces together and read into the deeper ideas being conveyed in this shot. To quote Jun Okada, Hayakawa, who was known for his menacing mask-like facial expressions and his striking minimalist and natural acting style, was the perfect embodiment of photogeny, which emphasized a kind of intensified realism, opposed to an artificial posing. Similarly, this shot from Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket is strikingly powerful and eerie, not because the actor goes out of his way to seem frightening, but because the viewer understands and perhaps identifies with the mental state of this character purely through analysis of his facial close-ups. Indeed, when actors overcomplicate the use of facial expressions in order to make a concept more obvious, the result is often more comical than effective. Overacting shouldn't be necessary in order for the viewer to understand the inner workings of a character's mind. Sometimes a blank face says more than a moving one ever could.